Good morning, everybody. I will do the presentation in Spanish because for me the English is a little complicated. I try to understand what happened in Guatemala with the project of trauma healing. Okay, la ciudad de Guatemala es el segundo país más violento
Of Guatemala is the second most
del mundo,
dangerous city in the
con
world,
13 muertes violentas
with
diariamente,
13 violent deaths
dejando a
every
muchos
day.
niños huérfanos.
A lot of orphan children.
Cada año, más de 5,000 familias pasan por un proceso de duelo.
Every year, more than 5,000 families have deaths to lament.
El pasado 7 de marzo
March 7th,
fue el aniversario de una tragedia que
the
enlutó
anniversary
a
of a
Guatemala,
tragedy
el Hogar Seguro Virgen de la Asunción.
in the Virgen of Asunción area.
El pueblo de Guatemala quedó muy dolido y muy preocupado por la
People
situación
of
que se dio.
Guatemala was very, very saddened by what happened.
Esa noche se originó un botín de 60 niños
There was a
que
mutiny of
intentaron
60 people
escapar del hogar
that happened that evening who tried to escape from this home.
como una forma de castigo. La policía local las encerró.
To punish them, the local police locked them up,
En donde murieron 40 adolescentes,
40 teenagers lost their lives that night.
18 niños y niñas desaparecieron,
18 boys and girls went completely missing.
13 adolescentes permanecieron en cuidados intensivos en los
13
hospitales
teenagers
nacionales y en Estados Unidos.
were in intensive care.
Nosotros como Sociedad Bíblica de Guatemala nos enteramos a
As the-
medianoche de lo que estaba ocurriendo.
As the Guatemala Bible Society, we found out what was happening at midnight.
Y nosotros nos habíamos preparado 2 semanas anteriores con la lección de ayuda inmediata hacia las personas después
So
de un
we-
desastre.
We wanted to see if we could help the people cope with these situations.
Y nosotros en medio de esto nos sentíamos muy adoloridos porque nosotros llevamos
We
4
felt
años
very
trabajando
saddened.
con este hogar, con un proyecto de
Andrés, por
libros.
favor, podemos ponerle solo media frase nada más.
Ok.
Sigue, por favor.
Ok, nosotros estábamos trabajando en el hogar
We were working in this home
durante 4 años
for 4 years
con el proyecto Libres para Vivir
with this project, Free to Live
y Alas de Refugio.
and Wings of Refuge.
Un año anterior
Previous year,
habíamos trabajado un campamento con Margie en el hogar
we had worked at a campsite with Margie,
y donde participaron aproximadamente 80 niñas y
where
niños.
we had the presence of 80 boys and girls participating.
Cuando nosotros nos logramos organizar, pudimos atender
So we got organized and we were able to help
con 25 niñas que se encontraban quemadas con sus padres.
25 girls who had suffered burns together with their parents.
También trabajamos sanidad de trauma de niños con 500 niños que fueron trasladados
We
a
worked on
otros
trauma healing with 500 kids who were transferred.
15 familias en duelo, donde se les dio un acompañamiento durante 2 meses.
15 grieving families who were accompanied for 2 months.
Y también se les dio una ayuda a 70 monitores
And we also helped 70 monitors
que apoyaban, que estaban en el momento del incendio.
who were present during the time of the fire.
Pueden ver a Doña Marta en esta fotografía.
You can see Miss Martha here in this picture.
Es la madre de una de las niñas que estuvo en el campamento en noviembre de un año anterior.
She's the mother of a girl who was at the campsite last year.
para mí es un poco duro contar la historia de esta madre
To me, it's really tough to tell the story of this lady
porque personalmente estuve con la niña que en el campamento donde ella
because I
dibujaba
helped the girl directly in the campsite where she would be drawing
acerca del perdón que en una de las lecciones.
what she learned about forgiveness during one of the lessons.
Ella me comentó a mí el motivo por el cual ella se encontraba en este lugar
She told me the reason why she was actually present at this campsite.
y decía que era porque sus padres no se habían logrado poner de acuerdo con la custodia.
She told me it was the reason was because her parents had not gotten together on who was going to get custody of her.
Y por esa razón ella entró a este lugar.
And this is the reason why she went into this campsite.
Ella lo único que esperaba durante el proceso era que en algún momento regresara con sus padres,
She was just hoping that during this process she would be able to go back to her parents,
pero esto nunca pasó.
but this never happened.
Fue una de las niñas que murió esa medianoche.
As a matter of fact, I remember she was one of the girls that perished that
En el
evening
incendio
during the
del
fire.
hogar.
This home.
Cuando yo estuve en la morgue dando apoyo a las familias de estas niñas,
When I was at the morgue supporting the families of the children that perished that evening,
pude hablar con esta madre
I was able to speak to this mother,
y me enseñó la foto de la niña, de su hija.
and she showed me her daughter's picture.
Cuando yo vi, rápido reconocí el rostro de ella
I immediately recognized the girl that I was very close to.
y le pude contar un poco de qué era lo que nosotros habíamos hecho meses atrás.
And I could tell a little bit about the things that we had been doing months ago.
En medio del dolor que ella sentía,
In the middle of her grief,
creo que Dios le dio el regalo más grande de poder saber que su hija la había perdonado.
I think that God gave her the biggest gift by letting her know that her daughter had forgiven her mother.
Para nosotros muchas veces no sabemos a dónde Dios nos va a llevar,
A lot of times we don't know where God is going to send us to,
pero Dios coloca a las personas indicadas en el momento justo.
but God places the right person at the right place at the right time.
Yo no sabía que yo iba a conocer a la madre en ese momento, ¿verdad?
I had no idea that I was going to get to meet the mother at that moment.
Y para serles honesto, yo tenía, tal vez no temor, sino no quería ir a la morgue y poder darle el apoyo a estas madres.
And to be honest with you, I really didn't want to go to the morgue at that time to support these ladies. It was too difficult.
Porque para mí era muy difícil después de haberlas conocido durante 4 años
After having met them for 4 years, it hit me very close.
y conocer sus historias,
And to get to know their stories.
verle a la cara a los papás.
And then see the parents' faces and all the grief.
Pero Dios tenía el momento justo para poder sanar otra herida de una madre.
But God put me there to help heal the wounds of this grieving mother. At
Las
that moment.
palabras exactas son tal como aparecen en la pantalla.
The exact words are just like they're stated on the screen.
A pesar del sufrimiento en mi corazón,
Despite the grief in my own
ahora hay
heart,
paz.
now I have
Ahora sé que mi hija logró perdonarme.
I know that
Esto es un regalo del cielo.
my daughter was able to forgive me, the mother said. This is a gift from heaven.
Realmente lo único que me queda por contarles, ¿verdad? Es que nos dejemos guiar por lo que Dios quiere que nosotros hagamos.
I want to tell you is that we should just let God lead us to where He wants us to be.
Porque cada día que nosotros hacemos un grupo para sanar,
Because every day that we embark on a new healing group,
estamos mostrando el amor de Dios
we're showing God's love.
y estamos haciendo que una persona pueda volver a creer en ese amor.
And we're having this person start believing in this love again.
Muchas gracias por cada cosa que están ustedes realizando,
So thank you for everything that you're doing.
porque yo sé que al igual que en mi país, hay muchas historias que cada uno quisiera contar.
Because just as in my country, there are many stories that you would like to tell us about.
Y que cada uno ha transformado vidas.
And that each one of you has transformed many
Dios los,
lives.
Dios los bendiga.
God bless all you all.
Thank you. It's good to hear a little Spanish around here, yes? Yeah, good. Thank you so much, Andres.
When I was in seminary, the seminary that I attended only allowed women to take an intensive summer course. So the degree that we could work for took us several summers to complete, and it was just like drinking from a fire hydrant. It was pretty intense. But the struggle for me was always to find a 9-month job where I could save up money to pay for the next summer's tuition. One year, I worked for a Christian dentist, a man who was a member of my church. And as it turned out, he was abusive. Working for him was my first exposure to emotional and verbal abuse. I was blindsided when on the first day of work, he began to shame and demean and mock me as I tried to work. It didn't matter how hard I tried, nothing would please him. And this went on for weeks. It finally let up when another new employee arrived and he turned his abuse on her. Evidently, his way of breaking in a new employee was to abuse them. His abuse was never sexual or physical, but it took a physical toll on me that took weeks to overcome once the abuse stopped. Over the past 2 years, sexual harassment and assault have been in the headlines in the United States, and I'm guessing elsewhere as well. And that story isn't going away. A litany of women, once bullied, threatened, and intimidated into silence, rose up to voice allegations against very powerful men who previously got away with their abusive actions. The tipping point proved to be the ouster of Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein, and that led to multiple resignations and firings. Over 71 followed in pretty quick succession. It also triggered an avalanche on Twitter. If you're familiar with social media, you know everybody globally uses Twitter, and there are hashtags that are used, that's the little symbol, to join a community talking about the same thing. And so this triggered an avalanche of Me Too tweets where women were telling that they had also experienced abuse. Some of them were, all they could do was just put the hashtag up. They couldn't even say what kind of things they had been through. The Me Too hashtag got translated into other languages, and the movement went global because it is a global movement. Here in the United States, Time magazine marked the phenomenon by naming these silence breakers their 2017 Person of the Year. I'm not a counselor or an attorney or a law enforcement officer. I'm a biblical scholar. And my research has convinced me, along with you, that those who follow Jesus belong at the forefront of this crisis, no matter who commits the abuse or what form it takes. I'm also convinced that we have responsibility to prevent it from happening in the first place. Yet instead of being active in that, we have serious abuse problems of our own. The Me Too Twitter storm was followed immediately by a damning Church Too Twitter storm. This was deeply distressing to me, as you can imagine, because I love the church. I'm a pastor's daughter. I grew up in the church. I owe an enormous debt to the ministry of the church to me. So I was distressed, but I also wasn't surprised, because I hear these stories all the time. I work with women, and they tell me their stories. And many of our evangelical churches don't have a very good track record when it comes to dealing with abuse and assault when it's raised. We've had some major scandals in major Christian organizations that have illustrated just how badly we are at dealing with these issues. Sexual harassment isn't confined to the secular workplace. It happens inside the church. Sometimes trauma is inflicted by trusted ministry leaders. Sometimes other Christian leaders exacerbate the problem by circling the wagon to protect the perpetrator and to protect the ministries and organizations involved. Victims are often re-abused by being disbelieved, by being pressured to forgive, forget, and move on. And all of this without involving law enforcement or professional counselors. Just days ago, the New York Times resurfaced a video of Andy Savage's apology for sexually abusing Jules Woodson when he was her youth pastor. He was a member of the pastoral staff of his church when he made his apology, and it was video recorded and put online, and he got a standing ovation for his apology. This time, this release of the video had been changed. It was titled, "I Was Assaulted, He Was Applauded." It included her commentary. She was 14 years old when he assaulted her. If the Church Too movement is any indicator, we have a lot of sexual trauma in church pews today. For many of us, attorney and former USA gymnast Rachel Denhollander has become the face of both Me Too and Church Too. Her Me Too story is about her fight for justice, and it made national news in the conviction of USA gymnast Dr. Larry Nassar. She was the first woman to step forward and accuse him publicly, and she gave the final impact statement in his trial. She paid dearly when she challenged prominent church leaders over a Church Too scandal she described as widely recognized as one of the worst, if not the worst, instances of evangelical cover-up of sexual abuse. She said, "I lost my church. I lost my closest friends as a result of advocating for survivors who had been victimized by similar institutional failures in my own community." In the wake of her losses, this is what she had to say about the church, and I quote, "Church is one of the least safe places to acknowledge abuse because the way it is counseled is more often than not damaging to the victim. There is an abhorrent lack of knowledge for the damage and devastation that sexual assault brings. It is with deep regret that I say the church is one of the worst places to go for help." That's a hard thing to say because I'm a very conservative evangelical, but that is the truth. There are very, very few who have ever found true help in the church, end quote. Well, this is where my work is relevant. I am profoundly encouraged by what I have learned just in the last day and a half from you and what you are doing to deal with trauma in the world and to cause people who are doomed to suffer the rest of their lives that they are finding healing and hope from your ministries. But in good conscience, we can't adequately address this epidemic without exploring causative factors that increase female vulnerability and allow such violations against women to occur within our own ranks. It's hard to stop sexual harassment and abuse if we create a climate that is conducive to it in the first place. Without investigating and addressing the sources of the problem, we're fighting a losing battle. So I want to make 4 recommendations for us to consider, and I'm sure there are more that can be considered, but these are the ones that really have confronted me in all of this. We need to put our own house in order. The first is that we need to get honest, and we need to address how we are being complicit. And I want to talk about this in 3 different ways, how this happens historically, politically, and theologically. Historically, the early church fathers set us up by making negative statements about women. Tertullian's infamous statement, where he blamed the entire fall on Eve when he accused all women in the same time of being the devil's gateway. One of the fathers called women a sack of manure. From Augustine to Aquinas to Calvin to Luther, patriarchy has been the norm in Eastern and Western Christianity. But patriarchy is a fallen cultural social system that empowers men over women and some men over other men. We owe these shapers of Christianity, of shaping our Christian theology, we owe them a lot. But when it comes to their views of women, they were wide of the mark, and they have done a lot of damage. They made the common mistake of thinking the Bible is teaching patriarchy, but patriarchy isn't the Bible's message, it's the backdrop to the Bible's message. It is the cultural backdrop that sets off in the sharpest relief the power of that message, the counter-cultural, radical power of that message. It's the perfect culture to set off in sharp relief that Jesus meant what he said when he said, "My kingdom is not of this world," not a kinder, gentler way of doing the way the rest of the world does things, but a radically different gospel way of doing things that reflects Jesus and his kingdom. So we have our work cut out for us to overcome generations of negative views of women. And that's a good place for us to begin. But we also need to address this politically. And I realize this may be stepping on toes for some people, but America's evangelical church's moral authority suffered a tremendous blow in the last presidential election. When the Access Hollywood tape was revealed, showing the voice of candidate then, Donald Trump, boasting about sexually assaulting women. And then that was followed by over a dozen women who came forward with allegations that Trump had done exactly that to them. The whole country watched while well-known Christian leaders doubled down on their support of him, along with 81% of evangelicals. I understand that there are a lot of issues that were involved in that election, but what happened registered deeply with women, both inside and outside the church. We need to look honestly at how our political passions can disqualify us from leading the fight to end abuse. And then we need to think theologically. My dental office experience doesn't rise to the level of the kinds of abuses I'm talking about. But Me Too stories have shed new light on my experience. During my ordeal, I turned to 3 Christian men who I knew loved me and I was very close to. I looked to them for help. They were appalled by my boss's behavior, but they were also clueless when it came to giving me advice about what to do. One considered confronting him on my behalf, but feared that might make things worse for me, and I think it probably would have. Mainly, they prayed for me to endure. Not one of them challenged me to stand up to him, to refuse to accept his behavior. I'm not suggesting that women and girls can stop every predator. I'm suggesting that our messaging for women and girls puts us in a weakened and vulnerable position, which leads to my next recommendation. That we need to rethink our messaging for and about women and girls. Author Rachel Simmons put her finger on a major contributing factor when she wrote, "Women have been taught by every cultural force imaginable that we must be nice and quiet and polite, that we must protect others' feelings before our own, that we are there for others' pleasure." This same kind of social messaging for women intensifies in the church. We aren't taught to be strong and courageous, even though that was Paul's message for us. We aren't urged to develop the kind of backbone needed in awkward situations with the opposite sex. We aren't conditioned to be decisive and proactive. Instead, silence and submission are too often the church's watchwords for women. We hear more about these two words than anything else that addresses us as women, and both words put us at risk. Yes, both words appear in the Bible and both words appear with reference to women, but both words take on deeper meaning, more radical meaning, when Jesus' gospel redefines them. Silence, the so-called silencing of women, becomes a distortion when it is interpreted as a ban on the female voice. It ignores other biblical texts that validate the female voice as an indispensable source of theological instruction for all believers. What would we be missing if we didn't have the theological voices of Hagar, Deborah, Hannah, or Mary of Nazareth? Jesus gave the strongest affirmation of women's voices when he charged his female disciples to proclaim the news of his resurrection and rebuked his male disciples for refusing to believe them. Submission in the Bible is a universal call for all believers, both male and female, that ultimately points to Jesus. His brand of submission, which we read about in Philippians 2, isn't an occasional event. It's a lifestyle of sacrifice for the good of others. It is not an expression of weakness or concession. It's an act of love, strength, conviction, and a commitment to do the Father's will. It may mean saying no. Church teaching on female submission has young girls in serious dating relationships asking, "When do I start submitting?" It had an academic dean at a major Christian college vexed when he observed his male students looking for submissive women instead of valuing women for the strengths and wisdom a man needs from his wife. It caused one Christian father to contemplate training his energetic and gifted daughters to be more compliant. How dangerous is that? Church teaching did not empower a 14-year-old Jules Woodson when her youth pastor crossed the line. We did not teach her that she could say no to a male authority figure in the church. I didn't know how to tell my dentist boss no either. We lose our voices inside the church, and that comes at a cost when we face awkward or threatening situations. It is also a loss to the church and to the men who need us to speak up. So we need to address how we are complicit. We need to rethink our messaging for and about women and girls, and we need to rethink our messaging for and about men and boys. The Me Too crisis isn't just a women's issue, and women alone aren't going to solve it. Women can ignite the movement, but any lasting change requires the significant participation of our brothers. What brand of masculinity do we preach to them? Does it reinforce male power over women? Does it portray women as the problem, or does it call men to be responsible for their own actions? Does it cast a radical countercultural vision of masculinity that reflects Jesus and his gospel? The Me Too epidemic is an abuse of power. Do we guide men and boys to exercise their power and privilege to empower others and to promote their flourishing? How would the church's reputation change for the better if we were doing that? Do we point to Jesus as the model of true masculinity? He didn't objectify or marginalize women. Instead, he valued their minds, their voices, and he empowered their ministries. Viewed against the backdrop of the ancient patriarchal culture, Jesus' interactions were shocking and radical. He broke all the gender barriers and validated and valued the women he encountered. The fourth recommendation is that we utilize the Bible's Me Too stories. Just like the Bible talks a lot about prison, it also talks a lot about Me Too. It contains Me Too stories that give pastors the opportunity to raise awareness of this issue in the church. Have we even noticed these stories? Hagar, Bilhah, Zilpah, and Esther were young girls who were trafficked as slaves, and sex ended up being part of the deal. Tamar and Judah's story is complicated, but Judah vindicates Tamar, and he condemns himself when he calls her righteous. Telling the truth about these Me Too stories also means coming to terms with the fact that some of our biblical male heroes were deeply flawed. Bathsheba's Me Too story provides a biblical precedent for calling powerful abusers to account. The prophet Nathan described Bathsheba as a lamb, and he leads King David to condemn himself and his own abuse of power and of rape. But there's good news in all of this because the Bible contains powerful narratives where a Me Too story could have happened, but didn't. The book of Ruth is Exhibit A, and I must say I will be terribly frustrated to be limited in how much I can say about that book because it has been life-changing for me. But I know most of us think of this as a beautiful romance story, but it's actually not a romance, especially when you put it against the backdrop of the patriarchal world. It is a classic story of trauma. Naomi becomes a famine refugee. That's enough to do it right there. But she also suffers the death of her husband and enters the most vulnerable demographic, becoming a widow. Her sons marry pagan girls. They go through 10 years of double infertility, which is a total calamity in a world where a wife's job is to produce sons to preserve the family. Instead of positive pregnancy tests, they end up at the end of those 10 years with the deaths of both of her sons. It is a total wipeout for Naomi. She is a female Job, and the book of Ruth is the story of a female Job. Job questions God's justice. Naomi questions God's love. But this book is Exhibit A, as I said. Ruth is at risk, and so is Naomi. For our purposes, I want to focus on the meetings between Ruth and Boaz. In both of the meetings, the meeting in his barley field and the second at the threshing floor, both of these meetings present situations that could have turned out badly for Ruth. She's young, female, foreign, a Gentile. She's in the most at-risk demographic. In today's world, we would call her Arab. She's from Jordan. And we would also call her an undocumented immigrant. Patriarchy deprives women of voice, agency, and legal rights, especially when there's no man in the family to protect them. Boaz is male. He's Jewish. He's in his homeland. He's a descendant of one of Israel's leading families, and he is a powerful landowner. At birth, patriarchy bestows on males power, privilege, and legal rights. Boaz fits the global profile of men who assault, exploit, and abuse women in today's world. Ruth's decision to glean was a matter of survival, but it exposes her to greater risk. She has to venture out in a foreign land by herself, and she becomes a common field worker. She's at greater danger at the threshing floor when she approaches Boaz in the dead of night. But this is where Ruth's story changes, and Naomi's story will change too. Both Ruth and Boaz live before the face of God, and this changes everything for them. What happens here is instructive for the church. For Ruth draws from her taking refuge under the wing of Yahweh, she draws radical courage that is absolutely mind-boggling in her circumstances. And Boaz will use his advantages in every encounter to empower her, and together, the two of them will bring healing and hope to Naomi. In the barley field, Boaz intervenes and tells his male harvesters not to touch her. At the threshing floor, when she approaches him, it's dark and no one is looking. If it came down to a he said, she said story, no one in all Bethlehem would believe her word over his. Instead, in every situation, Boaz will use his male power and privilege sacrificially to empower Ruth and ensure that her initiatives on Naomi's behalf succeed. In the end, a hungry widow is fed. A dying family is rescued from extinction. And God advances his purposes for the whole world through their actions that they never knew the outcome. They become a blessing to each other, to Naomi, and to the entire world by what they do. So it's no accident that sexual abuse is in the headlines, but this is a window of opportunity for us to become a beacon of hope, a place of safety, a powerful force to end every form of violence against women globally. We may not be able to stop a lot of forces that cause trauma in today's world, but I think we can make major progress on this one by empowering women and girls to use their God-given voices and strengths and courage to put no into their vocabulary and encourage them to use it in situations where wrong is being conducted. And by teaching men and boys that power and privilege are beautiful gifts that God has entrusted to them, and that they can use those gifts. And when they use those gifts as a trust before God, the Me Too stories will stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to share with you some of the issues that affects vulnerable women in Ghana. Okay. Yes, this is a situation in Ghana, and I'm sure probably in some parts of Africa, we will not be able to be certain about it, but accusation of witchcraft among women is an issue in Africa, is an issue in Ghana, and even though it's more widespread in the northern part of Ghana, we still have traces of it in the southern part. And sometimes in terms of handling the issue in the southern part and the middle part of Ghana, I think there's a little bit of moderation to the issue. But when we go up north, that is where the issue becomes a scourge on national conscience. And it's been a practice that has been there for over 200 years in Ghana. And we have various situations in the northern region which makes or entrenches this practice. And so today, myself and Gueneba will be making a presentation on this, and we trust that we'll be able to pass our message clear to you. It's also a generational issue because I said it's a 200 years practice. You have the situation that people can just get a dream. Somebody will wake up one day and says that, oh, I dreamt that because I was feeling sick, I saw you in my dream, and so that could also lead to you being accused as a witch. It could also be that there could be some ripples of deaths happening in the family, and a lady who is very vulnerable, in most cases, these are very old ladies, then they could be also accused as witch. You could also have situations where, even to the extent that in that locality, probably there was a bushfire and it destroyed something, and then they could say that there is an old lady who is the cause of this, and that could also lead to accusation of witchcraft. And in most cases, when this happens, either the person is threatened, either the person is lynched, either the person is killed. And so there are so many ways in which they respond to when one person is accused. And sometimes the accusations are coming not from even outside your family, but it could also be from your own family. Your daughter, your son can accuse you that my not being well in life is because of you. And I've had a number of confirmations in my dream or whatever, and I think you are the cause. And when such a person makes such a remark, the whole family can come up together and say that, look, indeed, you are. And so what happens is that when you are declared as a witch, there is an inquest being done. And usually the inquest will be done by some family members, or you'll be taken to a shrine. And sometimes it's amazing, the process. I read in some instances where if you are accused, the lady or whoever in question would come forward, and there will be 2 brooms. And the 2 brooms will be put on your neck, and you'll be dragged forward. If the brooms comes together, then you are guilty. If the brooms stay apart, then you are safe. And so these are some of the procedures that goes into it. And even in some instances, a chicken will be brought and slaughtered and thrown. And then if the chicken falls facing the ground, you are guilty. If it falls facing the sky, you are not guilty. And so there are so many ways of declaring who is a witch. The practice has existed for so many years because of the creation of what we call the witch camps. In the northern part, we have about 7 witch camps. And these are camps that if someone is declared a witch and the person can make a request that please take me to the camp, or family members could also request that take me to the camp or take their person to the camp. And so the camps have also been there to entrench the practice, because in the camp, also when you get there, you go through a ritual, and the ritual will also ascertain whether you are indeed one or not. And the camps, in some respects, are also a place of safety net for these women, because if these women do not go to the camp, they might lose their lives. And so the camps becomes a safety net. And social actors in Ghana over the years have tried to disband this camp. But government has tried to disband this camp. But social actors come up and say that, look, please, if you disband this camp, we are not too sure about the fate of these women and these vulnerable women. And so the camp continues to exist. Recently, they attempted to close one camp, and in closing, we will find the ladies coming back to the camp, even though it was closed, and they will be sitting and staying over there with nobody to take care of them. And so it tells us the issue that the camps becomes a safe haven for some of these ladies. Then also we have the role of local deities, because when the situation happens, sometimes you are taken to a shrine and the shrine would rectify or not rectify your accusation. Again, some of these issues in the northern region happens because we have low literacy levels in the northern region. And between the north and the south, there's a big gap in terms of educational facilities and opportunities. And so it tends to thrive very well over there. And also sometimes because they have low levels of education in terms of development, they are also challenged in that regard. So the accusations tends to increase more over there. Then again, we have interventions by government and churches and other groups trying to make sure that the dialogue on the issue, because, anytime the issue comes up, it becomes a problem for the nation, because why do we have a certain group of people in the country who we decide that they can be accused as witches and then move away from their family and to go and stay somewhere? And so the discussions continues, and it appears we are clueless about what to do because of the notion of witchcraft, and which has been an issue probably generations and centuries. And in terms of law, there is clear law on abuse. There is clear law on taking somebody's life. There is clear law on what you do to another person. But it becomes a challenge because you have tradition weaved into the situation. You have cultural structures weaved into the situation. And so even though you have politicians in the local level, you have police people in the local level, they have very little to do, because when the situation happens, there is a mob action, there is a group of people, and it is difficult to pinpoint and pick someone. We have understood some factors that we have not been able as a nation to really challenge the local narratives. Because if someone says that, look, I got a dream because I was sick and I saw you in my dream, and the person says it to someone, and then the person passes on, and then the person comes, the one who heard it says that this lady told me that she saw this person in a dream, and that's the reason why she brought the sickness to that person, and the person passed away. And nobody inquires whether the sickness has a medical situation to it. Nobody questions how come the situation, if it's a bushfire, how did the bushfire come about? Nobody questions. And so local narratives have not been really challenged so that we can really speak to the issue as a nation. And it's a big issue that we are all struggling to ensure that in that dialogue, some of these narratives are really brought to fore, and then we question them. Because without questioning some of these things, we'll keep the situation going. Then again, also within the cultural structures, you have a strong obsession to divination. Everything, everybody wants to go and consult. And they believe that, everything has a spiritual connotation to it. And so when you have a situation or it's a community where everything is spiritualized, you will have such a situation. And then again, we are talking about the weak enforcement of law. Perpetrators go scot-free. They are not brought to the book. They are not arrested. Just about 2 years ago, we were even in a place where we were having a trauma healing on Story Base, and we just got to know of a lady, a 71-year-old lady, who was almost nearly lynched by a group because she was accused as a witch. And no police engagement, no perpetrators brought to the book. And so you find this woman being at the helm of being always accused as witch. Then the closure of camps is also the one issue, which I've already talked about. Then again, we have a situation where there is a weak reintegration system. When these ladies, even, because in most cases, you would have the situation where the God so-called can declare that you are not a witch. But because she comes to the camp, and she feels that because I've come to the camp, I don't want to go back home, because if I go back home, I'm not too sure how I'll be accepted. And so most of these women decide to stay in the camp, and it makes reintegration back into the system very difficult, because we have had instances of ladies who went back to the camp and were accused again, and they had to come back. Clearly, when they go through accusations, they have a lot of issues that they contend with. Sometimes their right to life is curtailed. Where to live as a dignified person is curtailed. And in most cases, when they come to the camp, they have to build their own huts. And so you find these ladies go to the bush, make all the mats so that they can build a hut for themselves. The right to be different, because in most cases also, if the lady in question in a hut, and sometimes for those of them who really were not, who really came out not as witchcraft, as witches, they said that they were actually coerced to confess. And so in the moment of threat, in the moment of death, in the moment of all the appeals, they felt this was a good opportunity for me to say that I am a witch. I caused the situation. And then when they come to the camp and they went through the ritual, and the ritual found them not to be so, so we realized that some of them had to go through a lot of coerced confession. Folks exile, they are exiled out of their house. They never come back again. Some of them live in the camp for over 40 years. They die in the camp, and they never have a reconnection with their family for so many years. In some instances, the family members, one or two, will decide to come to stay with their mom in the camp so that they can help. But in most cases, if your own children accuses you, then it means that you stay there alone. And social life is disrupted. When they are sick, they have no money to go to hospitals. And so sometimes there were cases where they will be on the farm, and then a report will be brought that one person has fallen dead in the farm. Again, beyond the ladies in question or the victims in question, we also have the situation where the families of the victims also faces some form of situation. And one situation they face, because if they live in the community and their parents or their mom or whoever is in the camp, they are isolated and discriminated in the communities. Because if you live in the community and you want to buy something, nobody wants to take your money because your mom was a witch. Why should I take your money so that you also infect me with something? And so the children of these victims becomes isolated, and they have stigma for life in the communities in which they live. And in most cases, you find the children moving out of the community to go and reside in other community. The children are accused, economic livelihood affected. Even to marry is a problem, because how do you marry someone whose parent is a witch? And in Africa, because of the communal nature, where you are coming from, everything about your parents affects you. And so if your parent was declared a witch for whatever, nobody wants to have anything to do with you. So education and marriage and blah, blah, blah is affected. The children do not have enough parental love and care and support. So, and in some instances where younger ladies were accused, their children had to follow them to the camp. We have also noticed the role of the church. Government has done quite a few interventions, and it hasn't really helped much, because the only intervention government has is to close down the camps, and which has also been a failure. So the church also comes in to see what to do with the situation. And one of the things that we have noticed about what the church is doing in the camps is that they bring quite a lot of holistic approach to the issue in the camp. So sometimes they are bringing them material support, provisions, so that these ladies can just fend on. And then the churches also set up rehabilitation systems and integration systems and counseling and prayer, because they also believe that these ladies will also have to go through these processes. Evangelism and discipleship are in the camp, so that at least back in 2002, when I was quite young in the Bible Society work, and I got to know about this camp, I decided to drive to the camp. And my colleagues were just worried that, what are you going to do there? If you come back, aren't you going to be affected? Won't you be bewitched in a certain way? And so I decided to go to the camp, and I felt in my heart that if Jesus died for everybody, and even if they are so-called witch, they can also be reached with the word of God. And so I took the audio scriptures in the particular languages of the groups in the area, and I went to give it to them. And then when I got there, I realized that there was no place for church and blah, blah, blah. So I had to speak to World Vision. And I said, look, please, we have been able to set up some of these women to listen to scriptures. And so can you come and put up a nice hut for them, so that they can gather around the scriptures and listen? And so that was my beginning to the camp. And so when trauma healing came, we felt that this was a good opportunity for us also to speak to the hurting hearts of these women, because they live with the situation, being accused wrongly, being victims of accusation that they are not privy to for so many years, for 40 years, for 50 years, living with pain. And some of them can't speak. And the church is also doing their bit in terms of lobbying for justice for people who are accused and perpetrators who accuses these ladies and take them through. Then again, we also begin to see that even though the church intervention is good, you realize that some of the church's emphasis on demonology is also not helping much, because, in Africa sometimes everything must be prayed. And everything that happens, has a certain demons and spirituality to it. And so you find a strong emphasis on demonology and also poor pastoral education to be able to handle such cases. And when they go to the camp, in terms of counseling skills and blah, 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 it wasn't there. I would want to stop here and ask Gueneba, because when we brought the trauma healing to the camp, she's been one person who has been with us in the journey to see what trauma healing, especially from the story-based point of view, can do to some of these women. And so she will share with us some of the impacts.
Thank you, Charles. Now we are going to share about the trauma healing intervention. As he said, many people in the northern part of Ghana are illiterate, so we decided to do the story-based trauma healing, which is the oral approach. So we developed a special story set called the AMA story that fits their situation. And we did 2 trainings, initial and advanced, and we trained a total of 14 facilitators in 3 languages, but 2 are spoken in the camps. And we are planning to train 30 more facilitators this year. As a result, more than 1,000 people have attended healing groups in 2 major camps. And the facilitators we trained actually led 21 healing groups with an average of attendance of 50. Those who are facilitators, this is not the right number of a healing group. This is this is a contextual arrangement because the need is so huge and the pressure is high. People they cannot just understand why I'm not accepted in that healing group, and yet I am suffering so much. You see, so in some situation you have to make decision, and in that case, we advise the facilitator to emphasize on small group discussion. Yesterday, we saw through the result of the research that the smaller the number, the greater the result. So we are conscious of that. So we advise the facilitator to put emphasis on small group discussion. And more than 250 people gave their life to Christ. And we notice a strong collaboration with the local churches, and life-changing testimonies are many. We may not have time to share all of them here, but most of those women, they were able to forgive to those who chased them away. And most of them were able to now join churches and to live a normal Christian life. And they all say, well, we feel like a burden has been removed on us. And when we visited the camp during the advanced training, something very interesting happened. Okay, so this is a man who decided to make a song right there just listening to what we saw, because we dramatized 2 stories there. So after we finished, he just started singing, and in the song he says that, my pain was more bitter than the scorpion bite, but now I am healed. That's what he was singing, and we really joined the movement to dance with him. So these are the kind of testimonies you can have there. There are many. We don't have time to share all of them now. And as challenges, one of the main challenges is that people have monetary expectation, because some NGOs also go there to work with them. When they go, they do give maybe some gift or money. So anybody that comes there to work with them, they expect you to give them money. And another challenge is the unavailability of women to attend the training, because we did the training in a major town. So the women are not able to leave the camp and attend the training. But for the training this year, we plan to do the training within the camp. Though last time some people told us, oh, don't come and sleep here because we are witches. So we will try to bring solution to those challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Charles and Gueneba. And what a century-old tradition, structures that are putting people isolated from their families, from their children, without so many things, without, not thriving in life. So here are discussion questions. What generational trauma do women go through in your context? Maybe some of you have similar contexts or different contexts. We heard of the Me Too, the Church Too, hashtag Me Too, hashtag Church Too. We hear of the witch villages, the accusations. But what about your context? How are women treated? Is there gender discrimination? And then how can the church respond?
I'd like to thank Carolyn for her presentation. Is she still here? And in case you haven't read it, I read Carolyn's book that's titled Lost Women of the Bible, and it was just as powerful as what she said here, but it was a whole book. So I'm just wondering, Carolyn, if there are any articles or other books you would recommend on this topic where you've brought in the issue of the church and how it speaks to the Me Too movement.
So what are other books that I would recommend? Well, first I'd recommend some of my own books. I've written two on the Book of Ruth, and the one that just came out late February is called Finding God in the Margins, and I finished it before all this Me Too started. So, because I didn't talk about that, I talked about immigration and refugees, and I talked about there's a whole statement in there of the valuing of women and the valuing of men that's just incredibly powerful. I actually introduced the book by describing the Book of Ruth like a innocent-looking backpack that's full of explosives, because it's been that way for me in my own life. But I think we have to go back to the roots of what is the Bible saying it means to be a woman or it means to be a man, and so for me, Genesis 1 and 2 are hugely important to this. And I don't, the Me Too books that are being written now are talking about policy in the workplace and things like that, like Gretchen Carlson's Be Fierce, which I read. And Christian organizations need to look at books like that because it's, full of good information. But I've done a lot of work in going to Genesis 1 and 2 and saying, what is God's vision for women and what is God's vision for men? And is it big enough for all of us? is it strong enough to hold up no matter what happens to us in our stories? So it'd be extremely relevant to the whole trauma issue. You know, can somebody take your manhood away from you? Can somebody, you know, beat it out of you? Can somebody abuse out of you your wholeness is what it means to be a woman? And my book, Half the Church, talks about that for women, and the book Maelstrom, Malestrom, talks about it for men. But I think it's a bigger issue than just Me Too, and that's why, you know, that's kind of where I've come at it.
Any other comments or questions? Repent, please, yes. Is it a question for anyone in particular or a comment? Well, we'll see.
I think it's a question. I was asked during a workshop. When we finished the workshop, we did it to a certain group. They were traumatized because they were shot at, and one of them was injured, and they feared to go back to the field. So they asked us to teach them about trauma healing. So when we ended, I could remember one lady asked me a question, and I'm posing this question to all of us here. She told me, you know, Repent, we had a good time. But this workshop was both for men and women. For me, I'm thinking that we should have a workshop for women only. If there's a way, the Bible Society could arrange that. Because in Juba here, we have so many women are doing odd works or businesses because they don't have any other option to help themselves, to respect themselves. So some can sell themselves in the lodges or hotels, some do some odd jobs. So if there's any way of maybe developing a curriculum for women only, for women group, not without men or children, just women, it would be fine. So I'm posing the question to us all. Is it possible, if not in all other places, especially for South Sudan? Thank you very much.
I think the Bible says all things are possible, Repent. We don't say when, but yeah, that would be good. Interestingly, early on, we had trauma healing just for women in Congo Brazza, for raped women, because with the war, the way it went, there was like massive rape of women. 800,000 women were raped when they came out of the forest. It was a long story. But they organized workshops for these women in the churches, because the churches were saying, you know, praise the Lord, it's a new day. Forget those things that are the past. And, you know, these women had a little hard time with that, forgetting. So they had workshops for raped women, and they had a male on staff. One of the facilitators was a man, and that was also a question. You know, would this be too, you know, would it be better to have all women facilitators? And what happened in that case, and that was just one example, but the fact that they had a male facilitator who treated them with dignity and respect was very healing for them. So it was a very interesting case. But yes, Repent, your request is noted. Pablo.
My table obligated to me to be here and share with you some words. In Peru, we have the problem of domestic violence, and the main way for reduce the domestic violence is prevention. First, prevention, second, prevention, and third, prevention. And we have developed a 60 Bible study guide, 60 lesson for strengthen the families of different issues, you know, like risk factors, healing wounds, strengthen the families, different books. And we have available the 60 Bible studies in English and in PDF, and I can share with you.